emissions into the air by not driving as much and not idling, especially near schools. So this map that I gave you is an example of nature. It's basically there in an area of Roseland in southwest Santa Rosa that has a lot of traffic now. They put a school in, there's all kinds of traffic. And the thing about those people these days, they feel it's best to drive their children to school for whatever reasons. And so at least twice a day and sometimes more on the main north-south roads through Roseland, they're backed up with traffic. People who have driven typically single occupancy vehicle with one child, so that makes it 2 occupants. And they're there waiting in line and they're letting those emissions go out. Well, what's a beautiful thing about this map and this neighborhood is there's that natural area there acting as a carbon sequestration approach. So if you'll notice, it's called the neighborhood by the locals who live nearby. And the reason why they really like it is because for over 100 years, vehicles have been driving onto that land at different times, but they never paved. All right. There's some cement and some concrete was put down for housing foundations, but the rest has just been open. And so I bring this to your attention because I think you should go out and look at it. On Sunday, yesterday, at about, I think it was 9:30, there was a dozen people out there walking around, looking at things, talking about how nature can be one of the best ways for us to overcome human activities. Often in the past, people have thought human activities are more important to overcome nature. We need to flip that and change the paradigm now, especially with you folks having a regional climate protection authority. So please, this is between Burbank Avenue and McMinn Avenue off of Sebastopol Road, southwest Santa Rosa, in a neighborhood called Roseland. You can't miss it when you go down there. You'll see that big, beautiful area across from an ugly school, but it's okay. The school is educating young people, we're hoping, so they'll like nature too. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. And are those sailboats on your shirt? I feel like you're representing wind power. If so, you know, bringing it to RCPA, right?
I think whenever I speak, I'm very.
Touche. I appreciate your public comments, Dwayne. Taken and duly noted. Do we have any other comments, Drew?
Yeah, so we currently have Eris Weaver in line. Eris, I permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Is this also time to comment on consent calendar items?
No, this is public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. We will take a separate public comment on the calendar.
All right, I will wait then.
Okay, thanks, Eris. All right, is there anyone else who wishes to comment on public comment on items not on the regular agenda?
I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item, Chair Hopkins.
Wonderful. Seeing none, then we will move on to the consent calendar. Is there anyone who wishes to pull anything from the consent calendar today? Any of my colleagues on the board? Or any questions? Seeing none, I think that we know that we have at least one person who would like to comment on the consent calendar, but I will first ask if anyone present would like to comment at the podium. Dwayne, anything else on the consent calendar?
Thank you, but I think you should let the lady go first because she did say she wanted to do that.
All right. With that, appreciate that. And we will go ahead and hand it over to Drew for Eris to speak.
All right, Eris, I permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. I have a comment on item 4.7, the funding of the project in Pengrove. I was present at the Board of Supervisors meeting when that project was voted on, along with a large contingent of folks who live in Pengrove, who for years have been asking the county for sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, traffic calming, some way to make it easier for those who live there in that community to get around without having to get in a car. And what they're getting with this project is a street widening in a turn lane. This is an auto-centric solution to an auto-centric definition of the problem. It's not going to make things safer for people walking or driving. It's not going to get walking or riding. It's not going to get more people on their bikes or more people walking. You're the regional climate protection agency. Let's protect the climate and stop approving projects that are stuck in the old auto-centric paradigm and instead focus on the ones that will actually help get people out of cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Eris. Any other members of the public wish to comment online? Nope. No one else online?
No, no.
Okay, great. Seeing none online, Dwayne, you have the floor.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I appreciate the previous speaker's comments. And unfortunately, people are not getting out of their cars. It's one of those situations where even as we try to do behavioral modification by saying we've got great bike lanes, great bike infrastructure, lots of folks just don't use it. What I wanted to speak about on this consent is 4.6. I think it's very good that you get even more trees planted. One of the things that's really helpful, especially near any type of a major arterial, freeway, highway, any of those type situations, is having as many trees as possible that could perhaps deflect some of that greenhouse gas emissions from getting further up into the atmosphere. The key is to find trees that actually do that sequestration of those greenhouse gases. If you drive along 101 now, you'll see that many of our redwood trees have been decimated close to the freeway. And that has to do with the fact that those greenhouse gases having a negative effect on that type of a tree. So we have to find trees that when they're young can do that good job that you seek by having the trees there, not just as a noise barrier, but as a way to get the greenhouse gases sequestered here before they go further out into the environment. I believe that the University of California at Berkeley and their natural sciences department, they have studies that are going on looking into those types of things. And I do believe that the cooperative extension should be able to be contacted and asked about having something like that be studied, because we are a area that has said we want to lower the amount of traffic and lower the amount of greenhouse emissions, but we're constantly building more lanes on the freeway and being more auto-centric than one might think. So please reach out to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Anyone else wish to comment on the consent calendar?
I'm not currently seeing any other members with their hands up to speak on. the consent
Seeing
calendar.
none, I will bring it back to the board. And I didn't know if there was any sort of staff response or response from my colleague regarding the Pengrove project. I know my colleague's been working on that for a while.
Yeah, the Pengrove project is actually a safety improvement for the Pengrove School. It's a crosswalk. As it is a right turn lane, but it's also getting the crosswalk to the corner. Right now, that crosswalk is about 20 feet from the corner, which makes an unsafe situation. Incidentally, sidewalks beyond those in place right now in Pengrove are actually prohibited by the Pengrove specific plan because Pengrovians like the rural character of their community. I think we are all struggling in the unincorporated area about what standards. Are we rural? Are we urban? Is it walkable? And, Pengrove is no different. But right now, the sidewalk is on one side of the street, not both.
Thank you very much for that information, Director Rabbit. James?
So also just to add to that, with regard to the Pengrove project, it had been using a different funding source and not Measure M to advance. So with regard to the Measure M funds, it will now also get oversight from the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you very much. Director Cater Thompson, had you been leaning in?
Just for clarification on the project, so where, Supervisor Rabbit, where exactly are the sidewalks? Is it gonna go on the main street and the whole,
So this is the intersection of Main and Adobe.
right?
It's two pieces. Intersection improvement, yes. It's a left turn pocket from heading eastbound on Main so that you can turn onto Adobe. That will help in the mornings with school as well. And then on Adobe, it'll be heading northbound, a right turn pocket to turn onto Petaluma Hill Road. And that's where the crosswalk also, right now there's a creek down there. There's overgrown brambles. Those were cut back. But there is a crosswalk that's about 20 feet short of the intersection. So if a car is taking a right turn, for instance, you don't see anyone in the sidewalk until you or making your right turn, which when a school is across the street is an unsafe condition. And that's one of the things that's why it's being fixed in this manner.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Other questions, Director Harvey?
Supervisor Rabbit, is there anything that can be done to get the school to have a better situation with cars coming in and out? I was down even last week and someone almost got caught on the SMART train tracks because basically when school's coming in and out, the cars are just sitting there because they don't really have a good circular path there. So it ends up being just literally gridlock and no one will let anyone in or out.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going, and I've had community meetings with school officials and with the neighborhood on the school site itself, and then broader discussions, including a new traffic study that is coming out as well. The school itself actually has a pretty damn efficient drop off. It's just too close to the corner. And it's a charter school that is probably it's over capacity. It attracts a lot more. And since it's a charter school and since it's a rural area, most people get there by car and seemingly all in single occupancy cars. So it does create traffic in the AM, PM peak. Part of the improvements that we're doing at the left turn pocket, the right turn pocket, is to try to free up and on those periods of congestion to allow people to get through. It also goes to this whole question about whether or not you want to improve traffic flow. There's a wish to divert traffic sometimes, but as you all know, it's like a balloon. If you divert it, it's going to go someplace else and someone else is going to have to take that burden. So it's I think, a delicate balance to make sure, but safety is the primary concern. And you're right. I would also advocate, it's hard to get our schools to invest in infrastructure too, because they could, one of the recommendations was to do a berm that would prohibit left-hand turns, but they won't make that investment. So we're working on all angles, but totally hear you on not unlike probably many other schools in cities and the unincorporated area where the morning AM PM peak for school is always problematic.
Appreciate the robust discussion and also appreciate Dwayne, you standing up in support of trees. Fun fact, I believe that the greatest carbon sequestration in the tree world comes from old growth redwoods, which we have a few of out in my neck of the woods, but they're able to put on quite a bit of mass just because they are so huge, with each subsequent year. With that and the explanation on the sort of Pen Grove project, would anyone like to make a motion on the consent calendar?
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you, Director Harvey. All right, seconded by Director Rabbit. I think we can do a voice vote, right? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that does bring us to our first regular calendar item, which is our Plan Bay Area. And I do believe that our Director of Planning, Chris Varney, is going to be introducing our MTC staff on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hawkins and directors. Good to see you here today. We're happy to have Chirag Rabari from MTC here today to talk to us a little bit about Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus, which is the Regional Long Range Transportation Plan being developed by MTC ABAG and which will be adopted by them as well. Mr. Rabari will present today on the plan development process, some initial findings, state and federal requirements, including different targets and constraints, the project timeline, and then opportunities for engagement and outreach going forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Mr. Rabari.
Okay. Good afternoon, directors. So my name is Chirag Rabari. I'm the project manager for Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus, and I'm glad to be here with you today. So to provide a quick overview.
Might be off on the side, on the left side, it's the power switch.
Oh, I see. Thank you for bearing with me. There we go. Okay. So we are currently developing the fourth iteration of our integrated regional plan. since the adoption of California's landmark SB 375, or the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act of 2008. And what that act did was integrate the federally required regional transportation plan with a new state requirement to develop a sustainable community strategy that integrates land use and transportation planning, and also includes requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from light-duty cars and trucks. We have adopted two quote unquote major plan updates, the original Plan Bay Area in 2013 and Plan Bay Area 2050 in 2021. And we are currently engaged in a minor plan update, Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus, which is anticipated to be adopted in late 2025. And just briefly, the thing that kind of distinguishes major plan updates from minor plan updates is those major plan updates tend to align with the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Cycle, or RHNA, and there is no concurrent RHNA process with the current plan cycle that we are involved in. So just to quickly review some of the federal and state requirements that we are subject to, the plan has to be updated every 4 years. As mentioned, it must coordinate long-range transportation, housing, and land use planning, including the need to plan for housing at all income levels for the region's projected future growth. Again, we have to reduce per capita greenhouse gas emissions from light-duty vehicles per a target set by the California Air Resources Board. We have a robust public process where we collaborate with the public as well as key partners such as SCTA. The plan must contain a fiscally constrained transportation project list, so we have to project reasonably anticipated revenues and identify projects over a 25 or 30-year period that align with those revenues. And then the plan must be approved by our federal and state regulator partners, including the Air Resources Board. But this plan is not solely just a plan that tries to address federal and state requirements. It's also a visionary plan, as directed by our MTC and ABAG policymakers, that tries to ensure that we are meeting various different policy goals, not just those that are required by the federal and state governments. And in order to do that, we have an adopted vision and guiding principles for the plan, which is to ensure that by the year 2050, the Bay Area is affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. And to do that, we have 4 interrelated and integrated elements of the plan. We have transportation strategies and environmental strategies. And then we also have strategies for housing and economic development, as well as geographies that identify where housing and jobs will go in the future. And digging in a little bit further into the kind of key themes and strategies for the plan. So there are 11 key themes with respect to the different 4 elements of the plan, really looking at maintaining and optimizing our existing system and active transportation, complete streets, as well as investments in transit. Our housing element is guided by the 3 Ps of production, preservation, and protection. Our economic development strategies are really about improving economic mobility as well as helping to shift the location of jobs. And then on the environmental space, very much focused on resilience, access to parks, as well as reducing emissions from climate. Just to very briefly clarify, what we mean when we say strategies. These are either public policies or investments that can be implemented in the Bay Area at varying different levels of government, particularly local, regional, or state levels. They're not near-term actions or legislative proposals. And in terms of the projects that we identified for the transportation project list, those nest under the strategies that are identified in the plan. One of the things that's unique about the current long-range planning process is that we are currently advancing 2 long-range planning initiatives in parallel. So we are advancing Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus, which is a limited and focused update to the previous long-range plan. And we really have 3 core priorities that we're trying to advance with this effort, including enhancing public information, improving our communications with the public about who we are, what the plan is, updating assumptions to align with the post-COVID reality that we are living through, as well as implementation. We were in partnership with a transit operator project management team, including SMART, who is on our PMT. We're also advancing Transit 2050 Plus. And that really grew out of the need to reimagine our transit network and transit service in the post-COVID reality that we are currently living through. And so this is going to be a service-oriented plan, fiscally constrained transit network plan for the 9-county Bay Area. So if you think about these two efforts, we're really looking at targeted refinements for the long-range plan through Plan Bay Area 2050 plus, but kind of a more comprehensive reimagining of transit through the Transit 2050 plus effort. But these two processes will come together as a single integrated long-range regional plan later in 2024 and will ultimately be adopted as the final Plan Bay Area 2050 plus in late 2025. So, we are about a year or so into the planning process, having kicked off last summer. We had, robust engagement effort in summer and fall of 2024. Earlier this year, the joint MTC planning with the ABAG Administrative Committee did adopt what we call draft blueprint strategies and geographies for further study. This is really like the first draft of the plan, and we are preparing to release our analysis and outcomes of those strategies in the coming weeks, and I'll share some initial findings with you all on that front as well. And as mentioned, we will be engaging with, there will be 3 additional engagement rounds between now and the adoption process, and some of the key decision points for the board will be coming, later this year when we will be looking to adopt a final blueprint, which will then is what will be advanced into the environmental process in early 2025. So again, when I mentioned that, we have these strategies and geographies that policymakers adopt for further study, and then we analyze the outcomes of, where will growth go and what type of outcomes will we see from a policy perspective with this first draft of the plan. So in terms of how we are going to accommodate future growth of households and jobs, you can see that we have what we call growth geographies, which are areas that are identified and prioritized for future development. And the plan succeeds in, really focusing that growth in these areas that are, close to transit, close to existing development centers. The 70% of future job growth in our growth geographies and close to 90% of future household growth in these growth geographies. In terms of how these forecasts compare to previous plans, we do have less household growth than in the previous plan, primarily due to changes seen in the region post-COVID, but we still do expect to see strong employment growth into the future. And in terms of the distribution of that growth, continue to see, strong job growth in the peninsula and South Bay, primarily because one of the post-COVID phenomenons we're seeing is that there's a lot of empty and vacant office space in these regions. So in terms of how future, job growth might happen, a lot of that will be absorbed, we say, on paper in these regions, because the way these job numbers are essentially jobs by employer location, doesn't necessarily account for how many jobs are being performed from home. And similarly, we see strong growth in terms of future households where the region has strong housing markets. So again, in terms of these are what we call performance and equity metrics. We'll be doing a broader release in the coming weeks that gets into, very nitty-gritty detail into some, quantitative measurements with respect to all of these different categories. But I think the major story is that this draft blueprint does demonstrate significant progress towards improving affordability, driving economic recovery, and enhancing access to mobility. But there are a few different areas where more work will need to be done as part of the final blueprint process to make sure that we are bringing transportation expenses further down, improving accessibility to jobs, and further reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that will be all part of the final blueprint process over the summer and fall. To dive in on one, specific area that I mentioned as like one of our one of our statutory requirements. Our analysis of this draft blueprint does show that we are currently short of our statutory required greenhouse gas emissions reduction target, about 3 points of a 19% reduction requirement that the ARB has set. And, we are kind of facing several headwinds in terms of how we're going to meet that target. This plan, in particular, the fact that there is much lower transit usage than there was in previous years. That's very much hurting us in our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Somewhat counterintuitively, the fact that we have lower population growth than the previous plan is also hurting us because it is a per capita reduction requirement that's set by the state. All things equal, if you have more population growth centered in, low VMT locations, it will enable you to perform better on that greenhouse gas emissions reduction per capita target. And also just post-COVID, we are seeing a slightly more dispersed land use pattern. So all those things are kind of pushing us in the wrong direction. However, it's important to note that the draft blueprint that we analyzed did not contain significant transportation expansion or enhancement investments, which are being identified through Transit 2050 Plus, as well as the final blueprint process. So we hope that by adding all of those transit projects back into the plan as part of the next phase, that could help us close that GHG gap, although certain policy changes may be required. So in terms of what we're going to be focusing on over the next few months and possible engagement touch points, we need to make sure we hit that climate target to have a compliant plan. And generally this is required taking a balanced approach of land use strategies, transportation strategies, as well as targeted investments in transit expansion. But it will be harder this planning cycle. Generally, a lot of what we say the low-hanging fruit from a policy perspective, it's all gone. So trying to kind of drive additional GHG out of things that policies that we have leveraged over multiple planning cycles will be difficult. If we do not achieve that climate target, it would jeopardize approval of our federally required regional transportation plan. And, we do need to have a compliant RTP in order for projects to move forward and realize federal and state funding. So it's very important in that sense. At a state level, we need to have an approved SCS or Sustainable Community Strategy to be eligible to receive funding from various state funding programs, which, since 2017, have provided billions of dollars for Bay Area transportation projects. So again, very important to have a compliant Sustainable Community Strategy. And we would have to prepare what's called an alternative planning strategy to show how we might meet the target. And to date, no region in California has failed to achieve their target. So, we don't want to be the first. So obviously key focus is to make sure we close that GHG gap with targeted investments and equitable strategies. And I just realized I did not have the slide on the screen. I do apologize for that. But we'll keep going. So one of the other requirements I mentioned was the need for a fiscally constrained plan. So this is where, we're definitely seeing some challenges with the current funding environment. Looking at the needs to kind of operate and maintain our existing system, they're basically unchanged from the last plan, despite the fact that it's like a shorter time period. But in terms of the revenues, there has been a significant drop. And this is due to a variety of reasons, but in particular, we're seeing less revenue from our transit fares. So that's really hurt us quite a bit in terms of fewer people in transit, fewer transit fare revenues. We also have lower than anticipated new and anticipated revenue sources. And the way that the math works is that you take the projected revenues, you subtract out all of the needs to operate and maintain the system you have because of MTC's adopted fix it first policy. And then what's left over is all of the money to invest in transit expansion and enhancement projects. So that's almost half of what it was in the previous plan. And when you break out the timing of when that funding is expected to be available, the picture is even more challenging. There's very little near-term funding over the next 10 years compared to the previous plan cycle. And that is going to require some, some difficult decisions in terms of the projects and programs that were included in the previous plan. And, what we've been communicating to our partners is that there are projects and programs that were in the previous plan that are going to need to be delayed, scoped down, or removed to make sure that we meet that fiscal constraint requirement as well as meet that GHG reduction requirement. And this is something, we're going to be developing over the coming months is a, final transportation needs and revenue forecast. As you all may have heard, the SB 1031 getting, pulled from the state in the state legislature a week or two back. That's going to create some additional challenges for us because that is something that we were anticipating the success of the regional revenue measure in the coming years. So how we're going to fill that additional gap is going to be another challenge. So what's coming next? We'll be doing we'll be doing some second round of engagement in the late summer and early fall of this year, and kind of three primary goals. We're going to share these outcomes of the draft blueprint in terms of those quantitative performance and equity metrics, as well as a draft growth pattern. We'll also be sharing the Transit 2050 Plus draft network. As mentioned, some of the focus areas that we identified in terms of identifying investments, as well as how we're going to meet our GHG target. That'll be something we'll try to gather feedback on. And we also want to talk about kind of early implementation priorities. Obviously, these are, visionary long-range goals. We want to figure out what can we do over the next 5 years to really advance these things and make them a reality. There will be a variety of engagement touch points. So there will be pop-up and tabling events across all 9 counties. There will be online options for people who, can't make it to these pop-ups and are more pressed for time. We'll be having partnerships with community-based organizations who serve equity communities, making a broad effort with our tribal outreach and engagement. Obviously engaging with our partners and stakeholders such as SCTA. Then there will be a public comment period where we'll be accepting formal public comment letters as well. And just to dive in a little bit more on kind of the month to month and what's coming. So the draft Transit 2050 Plus network and strategies will be released on a wider basis in July. We'll be meeting with our partners to talk about that draft network in the coming weeks, including, SCTA and SMART. I think we have a meeting scheduled for June 20th. I think you all would be, will be interested to learn that although it was not included in the previous plan, the SMART to Healdsburg project is proposed for inclusion in the draft network that will be released in the coming weeks. We will kick off that second round of partner and public engagement in the late summer. Our project performance assessment, where we kind of evaluate projects and see how they perform along key metrics. We'll be presenting that to our policy committees in September, along with the draft network that, again, we're sharing on a draft basis with partners this summer. We will share some initial recommendations to our policy committees in October, the findings from a round 2 of engagement in November, and then the significant action item for the commission and the ABAG executive board will be approving these final blueprint strategies, including the project list and Transit 2050 Plus network in December. So, definitely a lot happening over the next 6 months, but time to engage and hear from partners about their priorities and concerns before any action will be taken at the commission level. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, or just listen if you have comments that you'd like to share and have set back to our folks at MTC.
Thank you very much. So turning to questions, Director Corsi.
Thank you. You mentioned, sorry, let me see this. You mentioned the death of SB 1031, making it harder to reach the GHG goals or requirements. Was 1031 relied on to get to where we are, 3% short?
So the 1031 was a part of our draft revenue forecast for transportation. However, the revenues had not yet been assigned to transit expansion or enhancement projects. So, we are going to have to figure out over the coming months, what are some alternative options to fill the gap left by SB 1031. It was almost $32 billion. In what was already a pretty difficult revenue forecast. So, the team will explore and present options, and ultimately that will be, presented for the commission's consideration in terms of here's what we can do to fill that gap. And that is what will help us, identify those investment priorities that we hope will help us meet that GHG target.
I assume that applies to Transit 2050 as well. Does that affect the timeline? You said it was due to land next month.
So yeah, I mean, the draft Transit 2050 Plus network will be released next month, and then will be shared with the commissioners in September. And that, the draft network that was developed was based upon the draft revenue forecast that we had developed, which, did assume, 1031 was part of the state of play. So again, something we'll have to do over the coming months to really hone in on that forecast, explore alternatives, and again, make sure that we can identify the needed, transit investment priorities for the region.
Okay, thank you.
Director Harvey.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. What I am struggling with here is, so we had these beautiful plans and everything was going along, and then we had a big hiccup of COVID. And so now everything's trying to come back online, and we know that transit's starting to move, but it's not moving where it once was. But the other thing that we had happen that also ultimately impacts our GHG is the fact that the way people work has changed. So there are a lot of employers that found that their employees can work from home, and there's varying different percentages of allowability there. And so how does that impact all of this plan? Because it hits, number one, the amount that we put out because people are at home instead. And number two, I know not all jobs can use transit, but it also impacts that because people not going into work. So how does that get incorporated into all of this?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it is something that.
And excuse me, just had a request from the vice chair, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slide that had the discrepancy between sort of transportation and housing.
Cool.
That might be helpful to view while we're answering this question, if that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, housing, not transportation, housing and yeah. Mhm.
Slide 8.
Yeah.
There we go.
So. Yeah, I mean, the question of like how to contend with COVID is definitely one of the things that we have been, has been a challenge with this planning cycle. We are required by federal and state regulation to use the best available data wherever possible in terms of like establishing kind of the assumptions that are available. I think what has been challenging with COVID is that some of the data is noisy, some of the data is unavailable. But we have been able to take advantage of census data and other survey data to at least get a baseline level that we feel pretty confident in terms of like what work from home looks like now, and what we think it may look like in the future.
So there is a data source to get that information?
Yes. I think it's from the census as well as supplemented with the survey of working attitudes, SWAA, I forget the full name. But we are anticipating that work from home levels will likely decline a little bit further from where they are right now, but likely stabilize at around, roughly 1 in 4 jobs working from home in the future. And again, that's based upon the best available data that we have now. We do update these plans every 4 years. So as more information comes in, we can update it in the future planning cycle. But, we again do think that working from home does help a little bit with greenhouse gas emissions reduction. But one of the kind of complicating factors is that from a policy perspective in the previous plan, we were already, I guess, we were really throwing the kitchen sink at trying to reduce GHG. So the fact that there was so much more work from home didn't help us as much as maybe we were perhaps hoping in terms of driving further GHG reduction. And it's also complicated because again, what we have found in the data that's available is that there is a lot of trip substitution that is happening, and that a lot of the work from home has been, unfortunately, people who used to take transit. So people are driving at relatively similar levels, but there are many, many, many fewer people who are on transit. So that hurts us in both directions. And then for the people who are working from home, they're making more local trips. So there's a lot of VMT substitution. So again, I think we were coming in hoping that okay, problem solved, work from home. We're not going to have to do anything new from a policy perspective to drive that GHG, but again, that's not what we have found.
Thank you. Director Edwards.
Yeah, I know that SMART has been one of the transit systems that's recovered the most from COVID ridership. And in Hillsburg, we have most of our GHG is vehicle miles traveled. So I'm glad that I hope that SMART can stay in this so that we can work and continue to reduce that.
Thank you. Other questions from my colleagues? Director Abbott and then Director Krupke and then Director.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. I remember I was president of ABAG when we adopted the first Plan Bay Area, and we did it at the Oakland Convention Center and probably in front of were you there? That it was about, I don't know, I want to say 1,000 people, and they were very angry because people did not like the idea of regional planning. So we've come a long way, and that we could actually talk about Plan Bay Area and do the new updates, and there's not the people with pitchforks out there. It does have some very we do meet our goals, but it comes with, and sometimes draconian ways to achieve those goals. I am glad that Smart to Healdsburg is now embedded in this plan, and that was a good outcome as we move forward. I do appreciate your comments regarding the work from home, because it is true. I think we all know that, and we need to really encourage people when they're working from home to stay at their desk for 8 hours before they get up and go anywhere and combine those trips, because it doesn't seem to be happening in that fashion. But I appreciate all the work. Look forward to it coming back to the commission and being adopted.
Thank you, Director Krupke.
Thank you. Going back to our last meeting, we'd had a small discussion, well, not necessarily small, but a discussion with some concern about the equity priority areas and how those were I guess, adopted or taken into account. James, do we have an update on any efforts of ours to help get those reestablished, or where we are in that process?
I would defer to Chirag to give you an update. He's very familiar with the letter that we wrote.
Yeah, happy to. So we did put out the new equity priority communities on a draft basis last month, or I guess it was 2 months ago, and we did get public feedback, and we did receive the letter from Sonoma County. I think it's going to be some months until the new EPC layer is finalized. So we're currently reviewing all of that feedback, and we'll be responding accordingly. But we heard loud and clear that there are definitely some concerns. I will just say that similar to other aspects of the plan in terms of updating assumptions. We're trying to sort of comply with these federal and state requirements to use newer data where available. And, all we were really doing is just taking the new census data and, running it through the approved methodology that we have for identifying EPCs. But we very much hear that there are concerns about, potential impacts on funding and prioritization. And, we want to work with everyone to make sure that people, feel that their priorities and concerns are being addressed. So stay tuned for more on that front in the coming months. But the new EPC layer will not be finalized, I think, until the commission takes action on the final blueprint. So again, that's slated to be towards the end of this year.
I appreciate that. And just to close a loop on it, I think it's worth repeating that some of those areas that are most in need of being included in the equity priority communities are those that don't necessarily work with the federal government, especially the census, on an accurate basis, and it tend to being unaccounted for.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, Director Okrepke. And just add that I would hope that, your organization would be open to other forms of data. Like we're actually actively collecting a community survey in the Lower Russian River area right now. We also have data from the portrait of Sonoma County, and I believe all those things were referenced in our letter, but would be great to expand that. Is it on the same topic? Sure. And then is it okay if it's the same topic? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Director Hinton?
Yeah, I was just gonna request if we could get that one snapshot slide, and if somebody brought up your sources, would you mind indicating what the sources are? Because that's really good information to share back with our cities, and I would appreciate that. Not necessarily the whole presentation.
So just to make sure I understand the request for the work from home.
The comparison that you had up on the screen when we were talking about it, which is the housing versus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We will be happy to share more info. We'll be publishing a whole compendium that has a lot of different data.
On follow-up today, could you just send us that screenshot and the sources?
Yeah. Yes.
So we don't have to wait for the whole
Yes.
published gigantic thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hinton. Vice Chair Bagby?
Yeah, I'd like to actually see the whole slideshow, and I appreciate Director Okrepke bringing up the issue of how disadvantaged communities are defined here in Sonoma County. And I think much of the Bay Area, we are a tale of two communities all too often. We have very wealthy, very affluent communities right next door to communities that are not as fortunate and have considerably lower income levels. And oftentimes that the data is skewed to the point where we really do need resources for our disadvantaged communities who live within a quarter mile or even in some cases right next door to folks who are much better off. So I'm very interested in how those communities are being defined. Just on another note, I'm very pleased to see that Smart to Healdsburg is going to be included in Plan B area as it should be. I think that at this board we've stated it several times. We have full-throated support to see the completion of the line to Cloverdale. Which is often discounted as being or described as, well, nobody lives there. But the fact is that wherever you are on the 101 corridor, it's in your interest to make sure that not only as many passengers are being able to avail themselves of SMART, but as many freight customers are able to avail themselves of those lines as well, because that makes the entire 101 corridor safer and more accessible for folks who rely on it. I'd also put in a pitch for the fact that as a couple of SMART board members are sitting here on this panel right now, that is real property that belongs to SMART and is essential for freight and passenger operations and expansion. And landlocking SMART from its areas of double tracking in its real estate is directly at odds with the folks who have voted for that passenger and freight service and who want a reliable alternative for freight and passenger transportation on the 101 corridor. And, you know, I define the 101 corridor very succinctly. It's everybody from, you know, in the North Bay, it's Sausalito to Cloverdale. And it extends to our trade partners and our students and our residents in Mendocino, Lake, and Humboldt as well. It is essential that we address the congestion on that corridor, and it is a vital part of our greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy. So I appreciate the presentation. I also took some pause at the draft blueprint outcomes slide with the growth patterns when, you know, there's definitely something missing when you have job growth outpacing housing, and housing is already desperate in this community. It's desperate on this corridor. So I'm looking forward to, you know, working with our partners to make sure that that we address that locally. And I definitely would like to see the full slide deck and the link sent out to the board. I wish we would have had that in advance, because I probably would have had some additional questions prepared, but that's just what I'm coming up with in conclusion. But thank you for coming all the way up here to Sonoma County and for your presentation. Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Other questions from my colleagues? One question that I have is that, you know, I recognize that you know, MTC in general skews urban. I represent a lot of unincorporated areas that are, you know, their own towns, have their own downtown, have their own residents. We have municipal advisory councils to try to sort of empower the local voice and planning processes. And I guess my question is, are there programs at MTC, or is it sort of part of this new vision to really look at complete communities? Because we are increasingly experiencing in our small towns a reverse commuting pattern where no one can afford to sort of live and work in the same community. At the same time, having sort of a sudden abrupt you know, sort of housing element, you know, increase without the necessary infrastructure creates a real challenge in these communities. And then as an added bonus, we're also dealing, at least in my neck of the woods, with high fire severity, as well as increasing flood prone nature. And so I'm just wondering sort of how can this planning process address smaller communities, whether that's quite frankly an unincorporated community like Guerneville or Forestville, or whether it's a smaller city like Sebastopol or Cloverdale or Cotati, in terms of, you know, we might not always qualify, you know, for the sort of bigger dollar opportunities by population. But I'm just wondering what support you can provide for smaller communities.
Very much, you know, appreciate that question. I think one of the things that we did look at in the previous plan was this idea of again, implementation and prioritizing implementation. And, you know, one of the things that came out of that is really the need for more, you know, technical resources, technical assistance. And I think particularly with, you know, in the case of the housing elements and from the previous plan, you know, we did take advantage of funding support that was provided by the state to stand up these, you know, county collaboratives, to stand up pretty robust technical assistance programs for every single community in the Bay Area, you know, whether small or large. And I think that's something that, you know, resource dependent, that's certainly something that we would be, you know, interested in exploring further. One unfortunate thing is that you know, the state had set aside a fair amount of money in the budget to help continue those types of programs, and it got rescinded with the budget, you know, the budget cuts, and that, you know, that further constrains our ability to kind of keep supporting these technical assistance programs. But I think that is something that, you know, we did you know, kind of test drive in the previous planning cycle, also considering resilience risks and wildfire risk and integrating that with the housing planning. So again, it's something with resources, we do hope to continue in the future. And again, all community sizes, not just the large ones.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up and then I'll hand it over to Vice Chair Bagby. What sort of form did that take? And you're talking about the most recent sort of, RENA process, because our small towns didn't experience any of that. And it came as quite a shock, and it was essentially each community for itself trying to analyze this, trying to make arguments. Hey, you've actually, you're looking at upzoning a parcel that is completely landlocked or is in the floodplain or is actually owned by a public agency who's using it for water storage. So we didn't really have any kind of community-based planning process. So if there were resources available, we would love to know about it for the future.
Yeah, I would, I don't want to speak out of my particular lane. I'd be happy to follow up with our housing and local planning team who helped to support a lot of those initiatives. But, I do know that there were resources that were made available at the county level, at the jurisdictional level to help with housing element planning, during the most recent RENA cycle. So I'd be happy to follow up and maybe provide more.
That would be
details.
great, because we had 3,000 units and really no planning. So would love to find out about those resources for the future.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Bagby?
That's what I wrote down. And I'm sorry, I should have asked this earlier, but it just sort of occurred to me when you were talking about, or reminded me when you were talking about your comments, of the 9 counties under MTC's jurisdiction, 8 of them really have rural areas, and probably a handful of those have potential rail in their, a potential for rail in their rural areas. I'm just wondering how MTC is helping rural areas position themselves for potential investments from the federal government in rural rail, since that is something that we're seeing is of increased interest at the federal level.
That's a great question. I think in terms of like competitiveness for for funding, again, a little bit outside of my area of expertise, and I wouldn't want to share incorrect information with you all, but I would be happy to follow up on kind of the specifics of rail planning for rural areas.
Oh yeah, that could be great. If you could follow up with the staff, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? I just also want to really lift up the point about the sort of hidden poverty that a couple of my colleagues touched on. I feel like I'm having this conversation on every single board and commission that I serve on, which is how do we actually move beyond census tract data? Because that's a really crude way of kind of addressing the socioeconomic status of a community, particularly when, as I think we experience frequently in Sonoma County, you sometimes have areas of extreme wealth and extreme poverty existing side by side. And so when you sort of look at that in aggregate, it kind of essentially serves to hide some of the most socioeconomically disadvantaged populations that we represent. And so really would hope that that kind of carries back into the sort of conversation around what are those equity communities, but also just sort of more broadly how you're approaching this, looking at some, and in some cases it might just be that we just simply don't have enough people, but they are, people who are struggling, they just don't sort of meet almost the number criteria. And so that seems like a very bad reason to not serve those folks, give them the attention that I believe that they deserve. Director Cater Thompson.
Just to follow up on that, like in the city of Petaluma, you have equity areas kind of all around the city, but they're not congregated in one area. And so then how do you say this is a equity area? And we're having the same problem.
Yeah, I will generally respond on this is, we have our equity priority communities framework. It's been in place for some number of years. It has a methodology that has been approved by our board in terms of, focusing very much on census data. It looks at, percentage people of color, percentage low income, and then these other disadvantaged factors. I think for this, limited and focused update, I think the decision was made to sort of maintain the methodology, but use more up-to-date data. However, we are planning on kicking off later this year a multi-year effort to re-envision our equity priority communities framework to deal with, several of the issues that you all are raising, in that there are a lot of inherent limitations with being a very geographically focused equity. We know equity framework. We know that poverty is not always concentrated. People travel throughout the region for work. So, we do want to move past this kind of very census-driven framework that's very geographically focused. But moving to a new methodology and kind of getting regional consensus, that's a very difficult and complex thing that's going to take several years of work and a lot of outreach and a lot of engagement to make sure people feel comfortable that the new framework is better than the old framework. So that is something we're going to be kicking off later this year. And, we look forward to partnership with folks across the region in terms of making sure we're using the right supplemental data sources, that we're thinking about the right factors. But it's going to be a process and it's going to take some time, but we hope to have it in place for the next long-range plan, Plan B Area 2060, which would be scheduled for adoption in 2029.
Vice Chair Bagby?
Sherrod, you just, touched on something that I just want to underscore, and that is that, well, first of all, my board members here are sick of hearing it, but one of the indicators of that underserved communities that I have in my city is the fact that, the Sonoma County Route 60 is the most heavily used intercity route in Sonoma County, and many of the folks on, we were talking about commuters and people going to work, but the fact is that the kids who can't get the advanced placement classes they need at Cloverdale High School are on that Route 60 going to Santa Rosa Junior College, and that's where they're able to access, and it takes them about an hour and a half to get to and from Santa Rosa if they're relying on Route 60. That's an indicator of an underserved community that you're just probably, they just don't show up on any of the charts or any of the, or a lot of the data. The other population that we don't necessarily think of as disadvantaged is so many disabled people are so dependent on SMART and Sonoma County Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, Petaluma City Bus, and those folks are dispersed throughout our community. And so, in so many other areas, you see a disadvantaged community, and it's pretty identifiable geographically. But when you're talking about high school kids or people who are, needing to access Santa Rosa Junior College, or people who are trying to return to school and change their careers, or if you're talking about disabled folks, they don't live in a certain area. They don't live in a certain place. And so I think that in Sonoma County, those populations are they're too easily hidden and too easily not transparent and easily seen. And that's when we are talking about transit equity, or we are talking about investing in where infrastructure investments need to occur, we need to account for those areas specifically.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, I would ask if any members of the public in person wish to comment on this item.
Yes, please. Could you put that slide number page 8 back up there? Thank you. My name's Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I love Golden Gate Transit. Been riding it ever since it started. We need to save it, and it shouldn't be in competition with the SMART train. SMART train's a nice situation if you're going where they stop. I'd like to see them have a stop in Southwest Santa Rosa, and that's called the Bellevue District. Andy's Unity Park is a perfect spot for a slide stop, if you would take that into consideration when you discuss things with smart people. Now, this slide, what's really interesting, if you'll notice, is that Marin shows a loss of jobs, but then shows an increase in population. One of the positives that could be really helpful to us is if we would get more people into Marin County. If you were on the bus, you get to see the population signs. San Rafael, about 50-something thousand. Novato, about 50-something thousand. Petaluma's up to 60,000 now. And then we come to Santa Rosa, closing in on 200,000. I think we should have that population growth back down to the south, closer to San Francisco, closer to the amenities and the infrastructure that are already there, especially during difficult financial times. We might not be able to get the money that's necessary to make things better further to the north. This sustainable community strategy and the 10-year-old Plan Bay Area from 2013. I went to those meetings down at MTC when it was in Oakland and basically participated in the idea that they would listen to the public. And it's actually more about the jurisdictional agencies and more about the different professionals, if you will, steering how that whole thing goes. One of the things I'd really like to see happen is that you folks take the steering and gear it towards the people who actually ride the transit. Okay, if you want people on transit, you need to work with those who get on the transit. In all the years I've been coming to all these meetings, I've only seen one governmental employee on any of those buses with me. And his name was Favea. And he worked for the city of Santa Rosa back when we were doing the Roseland Community-Based Transportation Plan in 2007. So it's really important if you're going to talk about how you're going to make transit-oriented development with increased housing and increased access to the parks and better greenhouse gas situations, you've got to have the people who are going to be on the transit be a part of the dialogue and have it be so that they see where they're making positive influences in the decisions that are made by the public policy folks. I haven't seen that yet in my life, but I'm hoping it will occur while I still have time to do that stuff. You never know how it goes. I will make sure that I just pass. Well, I'll forget what I was going to say.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Any other members of the public wish to comment in person?
I do not see other members of the public on Zoom wishing to speak on this item, Chair Hopkins.
Thank you so much. And I actually agree with Dwayne. I think that the more that we can allow the communities to drive the conversation, the better off we are. And I think that one of the challenge for many of us who don't serve on the MTC board is just sort of that lack of proximity to the decision-making authority and sort of the sense of lack of access to some of our communities. So look forward to hopefully overcoming that in the planning processes to come. Director Harvey.
Yeah, maybe one of the considerations might be to have people from MTC ride some of these transportation opportunities and hand out surveys there, right, at the people that are using it. Just a thought.
That's a great suggestion. Director Hinton?
Well, I have to comment here because I have Road Smart and the bus system and commuted to Marin for many last 12 years. And many of my caregivers are coming over from across the bridge, and we've had to adjust hours so that instead of starting at 7, they start at 6 and work and carpool together. And so there's, a constant demand for especially workers trying to get into Marin County specifically, and also on to Ride Smart and try to make those connections work for people that are actually riding them. They don't always work. The buses don't line up with Smart, unfortunately. Just have to say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had a fun experience with a former mayor of Petaluma getting stranded at a SMART station on our way back from an air district meeting because the ferry was late. And of course, we're running and then there goes the train. So I hear you. Other comments from? Yeah, we waited. It was cold. Director Rabbit.
Well, yeah, as an MTC commissioner, and we have 2 in this county, I just feel compelled after what I've heard to say that, it is bottom up. Actually, it is bottom up. And everyone who serves on the MTC, there's, what do we have? 19 commissioners, I believe, from throughout the Bay Area. Every one of them is looking out for their jurisdiction as much as looking out for the region and trying to make the right things going forward. There is transit outreach that's done all the time by MTC through the transit advisory committees that we meet with and take their input in. And I think they actually do a very good job in that as well. So I feel compelled to let you know that that is underway. And as for the disadvantaged communities, and I remember back in, it was Plan Bay Area 2040 then, that it was pretty interesting that every elected official wanted to have the most disadvantaged communities within the Bay Area in their district, because of course they knew that was a way to get the additional funding. What happened was it reverted back to the state standards at that time, which really limited. But at the same time, if everyone has a disadvantaged community in order to have a return of source of funds, those funds returning to those areas are not much, if anything at all, as opposed to really directing it into those areas that are truly disadvantaged with all the, in a large area. I do agree with, Councilmember Janice Keeter Thompson. This is why I've always been opposed to, Portrait of Sonoma. It doesn't paint Petaluma in the proper picture. It paints us everything is hunky-dory because we have a very integrated, population base via the census tracts. We don't have that one area within our town that has the lower socioeconomic. It doesn't mean that people aren't there. They're just hidden amongst everyone else. And that's true in many jurisdictions. And that's a challenge that we all deal with and have to continue to deal with to find out how best to get those resources there. But like with the Portrait of Sonoma, many times it's a crutch to really go towards other more highly populated areas of disadvantage and forgetting all about the people that are within those other communities that don't get the same services. So it's really it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of make sure that we're looking out for all those at that lower end of the socioeconomic side.
Director Harvey?
Well, to add to that, some of our communities have been very cognizant of making sure when they're building their housing that they do insist upon the inclusionary housing. So that is exactly why your neighborhoods have very different socioeconomic folks living right next to one another, because we've done that by design.
Vice Chair Bagby?
And in the spirit of being fair, I just want to mention that a couple of months ago, and it might not have been something that was really widely known, MTC staff and board members did come to I think we called it a whistle stop tour, and SMART starting in Marin and coming through Sonoma and looking at the housing opportunities that were in the proximity to the rails. And we had I think we had a very good discussion, and they were very impressed with the staff members who came to the stops at Petaluma and Santa Rosa and Rohnert Park. And we had a very productive discussion. So I just want to let everyone know. And I think, Brian, were you able to participate in that with us? I'm not sure you were there, but you were there in spirit. You were there in spirit. And they also actually, we bussed up to Healdsburg to look at the downtown and the potential station sites. So I would have to say that where SMART was concerned and their interest in what Sonoma County can offer as far as housing potential in proximity to the SMART station, we had a very positive conversation, and I really appreciated staff and board members coming up to Marin and Sonoma County, taking time out and coming up to see what we had to offer with their own eyes, because I think, all of us look at packets all the time and maps and charts all the time, but there's nothing like getting feet on the ground and having conversation with local policymakers, and MTC should really be commended for that level of participation. I think it was delayed a while because of COVID, so hopefully we'll also have similar meetings in the future with them.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Bagby. One just sort of final thought. I do agree that if every community is disadvantaged, then no community, actually has an opportunity to be highlighted. I think that's a fair statement. However, I would encourage MTC to look beyond census tracts. And an example is that Monterey is currently apparently proposed to be delisted. It has the highest opioid-induced fatality rate in Sonoma County, the highest per capita homelessness rate in Sonoma County, and also the highest rate of unemployment in Sonoma County, in a small town of roughly 1,000 people. In addition, it also lacks sewer services, which has led to an attrition of businesses. People live on postage stamp sized parcels, and they literally cannot actually fit a compliant septic system. So there really is sort of nowhere for them to turn and no way to improve their properties. And so I think that also when we look at challenges like lack of access to water and wastewater infrastructure and or environmental contamination, which I know that Roseland, does typically merit sort of that equity priority community, denotation, but also really has struggled with brownfield and water contamination and other challenges. I know that's something that Dwayne has highlighted repeatedly at various boards and commissions. Perhaps there are some other considerations that can be taken into account, by MTC on those points moving forward, because that's data and I also do want to acknowledge the challenge of how do you, support at-risk folks who are potentially surrounded by wealth, but still very much struggling and on, that precipice. And so that's something that we all, I think, have to try to grapple with. Any response or any thoughts?
Yeah, I did just want to, I think, briefly note as to your point on, looking beyond census tracts, again, something that is going to be a part of this future refresh. We want our regional equity priority community framework to be as comprehensive as possible and to take all of these things into different items into consideration. But I do want to clarify one thing, which is that I think, where this, the rubber hits the road for a lot of these things, a lot of these considerations is with respect to funding, right? Like that's the biggest thing that people are concerned about is like how, how are the EPCs used to identify, priority communities for investment, priority projects. But it's important to clarify that the EPC framework from a funding perspective, it is just one consideration among many other factors in terms of how MTC, funding priorities are identified. So obviously it's important because it is, like our framework, but when MTC is developing their, funding guidelines for discretionary funding programs, it doesn't just say like only equity priority communities will be identified. There is consideration that is provided for other data sources, whether at the state level or the funding or the federal level. So, that is just important to make sure people understand that, being an equity priority community is not the only way to be identified for discretionary funding. There are the other data sources that are taken into consideration, and that will continue to be the case in the future. However, we want to be cognizant about the limitations of our own framework and make sure that this refresh thinks about how to make it more comprehensive to deal with a lot of the, the limitations that you all have, spoken eloquently about.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And I would just add though, that I think a lot of us, representing smaller cities or sort of smaller jurisdictions have a hard time competing just on numbers. We just don't have the population. And so that kind of designation almost on a rural community basis might even mean more, than on a very large metropolitan area. Like I can't think of actually any funding that we've received, and we've certainly applied in the almost 8 years I've served on the board, because we do struggle to compete given the less populated nature of my district that I represent. So anyways, thank you. Any final comments from my colleagues? All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it. And I understand that we're going to have a different presentation from MTC next month as well. So this was sort of in some ways a preview, more things to come. And with that, we will go ahead and move on to our integrated transit plan recommendation report. And I believe that Dana Ture, our transportation planner, is going to introduce this item.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hopkins and directors. This item is regarding the recently completed integrated transit service plan, which was funded through transit integration funds that SCTA received from MTC. I'm going to provide a brief background on transit integration and work being done in this area before passing it off to our consultant who developed the plan. So this plan was presented to the Transit Ad Hoc on May 20th. And the staff recommendation today is to accept the plan and direct staff through a resolution to continue coordination with the transit operators on advancing high priority recommendations in the plan to facilitate the next phase of transit website integration and to facilitate a memorandum of understanding between the operators with a work plan to advance integration recommendations. So efforts to integrate transit operations have a long history. In 2012, MTC completed the Transit Sustainability Project, which included a recommendation for operators in Sonoma County to pursue functional and institutional consolidation. In 2019, SCTA, in collaboration with Sonoma County Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, and Petaluma Transit, as well as MTC, completed the Transit Integration and Efficiency Study, also known as TIES. And the purpose of this study was to identify actions that, through collaboration among the 3 local operators, would improve the rider experience, increase efficiency of delivering high-quality service, and reduce operating and capital costs to enable improved service. In 2020, in response to pandemic-related challenges for transit throughout the Bay Area, MTC created a Blue Ribbon Transit Task Force to recognize critical recovery issues facing public transit, advance equity, identify actions to implement network management and governance reforms, and to advance transit initiatives and integrate reforms. Out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force came the Bay Area Transit Transformation Action Plan. This plan identified a problem statement focused on unique policies, procedures, and practices in each of the 27 transit agencies in the Bay Area, and lack of customer support for interagency travel. Goals and actions were identified around fares and payment, customer information, transit network accessibility, and funding. So MTC developed a regional network manager team and structure to implement the Transit Transformation Action Plan. And the regional network manager looks at the entire transit system to identify ways to improve the network and the rider experience. There are 3 different advisory bodies for this effort and dozens of recurring meetings to coordinate with the transit operators on various topics for implementation. And we've used our Transit Technical Advisory Committee to coordinate the coverage of those meetings directly with the transit operators in Sonoma and Marin counties, and report out to the group. Several efforts that are currently underway at the regional level are listed here. And some of this work is referred to in our integrated transit service plan. And we're working with MTC on an ongoing basis to confirm the roles and responsibilities on some of those items that are referred to in both their planning documents and ours. And through our last meeting with MTC, we refined some of the roles and responsibilities in the integrated transit service plan, and we provided a handout to you with some of the revisions on the recommendations in terms of roles and responsibilities between SCTA, MTC, and the transit operators. I'd also like to mention that MTC's mapping and wayfinding program will be installing a prototype in Santa Rosa at the Transit Mall and the downtown Smart Station this fall. And Sonoma County will be included in the pilot program, which is set to roll out in 2026. So since SCTA's Transit Integration and Efficiency Study was developed in 2019, a lot of progress has been made on implementation. This slide lists several successes in service planning, including the Integrated Transit Service Plan, which will be presented shortly, as well as customer service coordination, fare program integration, marketing, and public information. Another ongoing effort began last fall when transit agencies, the Transportation Authority of Marin, SCTA, and MTC convened to discuss the Golden Gate Bridge and Highway Transit District's strategic planning initiative. And discussions began that formed the Marin Sonoma Coordinated Transit Service Analysis, also known as MASCOTS. So changes in travel patterns, funding, and current planning efforts prompted rethinking of service along the Highway 101 corridor. There are monthly general manager meetings, and subcommittees have been formed for various areas, including development of the planning study, coordination on joint transit marketing opportunities, and addressing the financial situation. Goals of this plan are to inform future regional transit service planning activities in collaboration with the local transit operators and maximize rider benefit through the resources available. The plan is expected to be completed later this calendar year. And so the MASCOTS plan is really focused on the regional operators. So along 101 corridor, Golden Gate, and Smart Service, whereas the Integrated Transit Service Plan, which will be presented next, is really focused on the 3 local bus operators. Although in both efforts, there is an overlap, and the regional operators are looked at in the local plan, and the local operators will be looked at in the regional plan. So I just want to provide that bit of background before I introduce our consultants. I also wanted to note that 2 of the 3 local bus transit managers are here in the audience, and the 3rd is likely on the Zoom, or is on the Zoom. So With that, I will turn it over to Tim Payne from Nelson Nygaard, who is the lead on the Integrated Transit Service Plan.
Thank you, Dana, and good afternoon to the SCTA board. It's a pleasure to join you. I wish I was there in person. Had I even planned to be there in person, I wouldn't be there in person because of some personal deformities, and that's a whole nother story. But you know, it's kind of like if you're a student of the New Testament, you know that the Apostle Paul in his later years referred to having personal issues that kept him from visiting some of his outpost communities, some of his original missions. And that's in some respects how I sort of feel these days personally. So if I seem a little out of sorts, it's because I am, but mentally I'm in good shape. So if we can advance the show to the presentation, that would be great. Or Kyle, maybe you can run it up for me.
Yeah, I can if someone, or if Ross wants to share.
There we go. And then get us back. One more try. Get us to the correct, there's so many PowerPoints and so little time, right? Maybe I'll just start while we're waiting for that to come up. Just a little bit of what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit, Dana already introduced a lot about what we intended to do with the Integrated Transit Services Plan, so I won't spend too much time on the project overview. Really importantly, a large portion of this was in fact the outreach that we conducted. So we want to spend some time talking about that. A little bit of time, again, going back, Dana did a great job of outlining how this all fits together with the work that MTC is leading and contributing to. We want to make it really clear that this all fits together hand in glove, that it is not one trying to outdo the other. It's in fact trying to all accomplish the same goal at different rates and at different levels of opportunity. A little bit about what should be tackled first, what some of the most important priorities are, and then finally talk a little bit about next steps. So we can skip ahead to slides here. You can skip, yeah. So again, the overarching vision is really to improve mobility for transit riders in Sonoma County. That is where we're trying to go overall. And it's really starting to look at where there are opportunities for reducing some of the duplication of service that exists in and among the county. And in some places there is no duplication of service. So let me make that really clear. But the objective is to be able to see if there are ways to reinvest some of that duplication to improve transit service throughout the county. That's the overall goal. The three major agencies involved were already listed, but we also had substantial discussions with SMART as well as with Golden Gate Transit. We started work a little over a year ago. And again, this really builds off of the work that was done with the TIE study that Dana referred to a little bit earlier. Next slide, please. So why is transit integration so important in Sonoma County? And the answer to that is really simple, and you probably already know this. About 90% of the travel that starts in Sonoma County ends in Sonoma County. For being a county that is sort of on the fringe, if you will, of the really large amount of population in the Bay Area, this is pretty unique. Usually you see a lot more travel dependency on adjoining counties. That is not the case in Sonoma County. Sonoma County has very high internal travel levels. And that isn't to say nobody leaves Sonoma County. Certainly they do on a daily basis, but by far the preponderance of travel is generated and stays more locally within the county. Equally important is that of that, many lower income people depend on transit to move all over the county, not just one place, but throughout the entire county. And you talked about that a little bit earlier today, including some of the less populated parts. And these integration efforts really need to advance to be able to address some of the major mobility issues that are faced by transit riders, as well as to attract new transit riders. I think that's incredibly important as we talk about how we can start offsetting VMT per capita. One of the ways to do that is to find an alternate mode that does not involve a private vehicle. Transit is one way that certainly can be accomplished. In many cases, some of the more urbanized areas appear to be somewhat overserved, but many areas, especially in the more rural areas, are underserved. I think the example earlier today was given of students who live in Cloverdale and are trying to reach Santa Rosa Junior College, having a really long trip to be able to do that. It's even longer if one of their classes ends up down at the Petaluma campus instead of just at the Santa Rosa campus. That extends their travel even further. So again, I think one of the things we're trying to do is to reduce some of the over-servicing ability to be able to improve distribution throughout the county. I do want to go back and talk just a little bit about SMART. Here, just to highlight something. SMART has become an extraordinarily important part of the 101 corridor. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later on. But 87% of the trips on SMART, of total daily trips on SMART, have either one leg or both legs that happen in Sonoma County. The #1 boarding station for boardings in the SMART system is in Sonoma County. That's the city of Petaluma. The Petaluma main SMART station is the #1 boarding location in the entire SMART system for what's happening. And the reason is because it's kind of halfway in between, and a lot of travel goes in both directions. From Petaluma, and some of it's relatively local. As that comment was made earlier about some of the more regional providers actually also have a somewhat more local or semi-regional role to play. Next slide, please. The good news for Sonoma County Transit overall, and I don't mean Sonoma County Transit in terms of the name agency Sonoma County Transit, I mean transit throughout Sonoma County more generically. The good news is that all of the transit agencies in the county are in a recovery pattern, building ridership back up from the low point of, if we wanted to look at the COVID pandemic as being sort of the low point in what happened in transit ridership. One of them was already pointed out earlier today, that SMART is already above pre-COVID rates of ridership. There's numerous reasons for that, but other agencies are continuing to gain on that and are in a really positive, forward-looking way in how they can continue to provide mobility throughout Sonoma County. And the good news is the entire story is being told by what ridership is demonstrating. It shows there's a need for transit and there's a need for continued improvement in transit in Sonoma County. So this is a good time to really consider, how do we best utilize our resources to be able to meet some of those needs? Next slide, please. So what are the transit riders saying? This is probably one of the most undersold but overlooked portions of what we originally did when we wrote the original scope of work for this project. It turned out to be a fantastic effort. Next slide, please. We did some really substantial outreach just about a year ago now in Sonoma County. We had 8 different community events throughout the county. We were in Sebastopol, we were in Sonoma, to name a couple. The weather, if you remember, a year ago in April and May wasn't always the most propitious. We had a lot more rain than we're used to in Sonoma County. It kind of made things a little bit more interesting. But we also visited 8 transit stations or the colleges with pop-up events. Again, that's where we staff a table and trying to intercept transit riders as they come and go from their various places. And we also administered a public survey. At the same time, we received about 774 responses. In that time period, and breaking a record for Nelson Nygaard at least. We offered it in both English and Spanish. We got 34, which doesn't sound like a lot. Normal is 3 to 5 responses that we'll get for a public response of this size that are in Spanish. We had half of our outreach team was fully bilingual, and they conducted a lot of their outreach in Spanish in Sonoma County. And again, the numbers don't really belie the importance of that, but we were able to engage a lot more people because we went with a very intentionally bilingual outreach staff. So we rode trains and buses, again, to alert people to the survey availability, to pass out flyers, to be able to take the survey. We also administered it at all 16 of the events that I referred to a little bit earlier, and we also promoted on social media platforms. Next slide, please. So what did we learn? Well, we learned an awful lot. And if I went through the whole survey, we'd be here for the rest of the afternoon, and James would frown at me, and I don't have that much time. So we're going to cut to the chase. About 51% of the writers said that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with what goes on overall in transit in Sonoma County. The net satisfaction score, however, is about 31%. Which means that there's still a substantial portion of the population who is not satisfied or is very dissatisfied with what their capabilities are. Typically, in these net satisfaction scores, you like to see your results someplace between above 70%, that you have a lot more people happy with you than you have who are unhappy with you. It just indicates we've got a long ways to go, that transit in general, at least generally among the writers, is there's still a positive view held by a relatively small majority, but we need to work to get more of those folks from the not satisfied or very dissatisfied up into the I'm really happy with transit, I'm a transit promoter in Sonoma County. Next. So why is this important? Again, already said this, transit is an absolute lifeline for many riders in Sonoma County. Don't take it from me, this is from them. They simply have no other transportation options. About 45% of the riders who use either City Bus, Petaluma Transit, or Sonoma County Transit don't have regular access to a vehicle. And when you then focus on just the lower income riders, household income of $60,000 or less, and we can argue about what that definition is all day long, but 60% of the lower income said they also do not have access to regular access to a vehicle. So transit in Sonoma County is their form of mobility. It's how people get around the county. And so it is absolutely crucial that we continue to be able to sustain the network and improve it where we can. So one of the ways that we can do that is by reducing some of the duplication of service and providing a more seamless trip for these folks. Some of those folks will come to a transit station, and the bus that they were on, I heard the anecdote earlier about getting the last ferry from San Francisco, and just before you get to the train station, the train takes off. That is a daily occurrence for many riders in Sonoma County, where they will show up on one carrier, and the next carrier, the next trip is either just left, it's an hour and a half away. And that can be a real problem in terms of how much time people have to take to make a trip. Next slide, please. And that just gets along to what the top 5 issues are for riders. Many of these folks, the buses don't run early or late enough on weekends. So their level of satisfaction their dissatisfaction outweighs the level of satisfaction, to the point where the net satisfaction score is in the negative range, which means there's a lot more people dissatisfied than satisfied. Buses don't operate frequently enough on weekends, nor do they run late enough on weekdays. They don't run often enough on weekdays. And again, we're all the way up to a -11 net satisfaction, meaning there's still many more people dissatisfied than satisfied. And then finally, waiting time, which I earlier mentioned, is also a net dissatisfaction. We're going to, next slide, please, talk just a little bit more about that, is about why is that important? Because again, based on the survey, about half the riders for transit trips taken in Sonoma County report that they require transfers either some or all of the time on their regular trips. So sometimes they may not need a transfer, but sometimes they do need a transfer. And again, about 70% of the riders who said they do take transfers said that coordinating schedules to reduce their waiting time in between arriving on one bus and leaving on the next would be really an important thing that the agencies could do to make their lives a little bit easier. One of the difficulties we have in trying to understand what those patterns are is we do not have a really good understanding, other than SMART, who has really great data because of the way they collect fares. We don't have a really great parallel understanding of how the transit network works. So I can't tell you how many people, for instance, are living in Cloverdale and trying to get to Santa Rosa Junior College. I know there are people that do it, how many they do it, what time of day, that sort of thing. So again, better understanding the origins and destinations can really help us begin to zero in on where transfers, especially between agencies, can either promote or make it harder for people to complete their trips. Next slide, please. So why don't riders use transit more often? The service is there. Why don't people just use it? 50% of the people say it's because it's not running when I need it to run. 42% say it's not running where I need it to go. And not surprisingly, again, many people say it just takes too long to get from point A to point B. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of direct quotes from the riders. And again, we could go through this all day long. I invite you to look at the report that in the appendix has absolutely the full rundown of everything that we did, including the full detailed data from the survey. And there's a lot more information there from the survey. But the writers, this is not from the consulting team. This is from the writers. We invited people to, in a fairly small space actually, to provide free form feedback to us. And we got about 3/4 of the surveys that we got back, roughly, maybe a little bit less than that, but in that vicinity, had comments added, free-form comments added to the survey. So this is something people are really anxious to talk about. Just a couple of quotes, people are saying better integration between the transit systems is overdue. And this next one talks about why people see weekend service as being so important. The understanding that people do still work on weekends that need to take buses. So we're in that lower income household range where people have a job that starts Saturday morning or ends Sunday night or something like that. And they have issues getting to and from that job because of the lack of availability of transit. Next slide, please. Moving on. So how do these fit? How does all this fit in with the MTC efforts? And again, we could talk about this. I think Dana did a great job. So next slide, please. We won't spend an awful lot of time about this, except to say that MTC has a number of efforts already underway. It makes a lot of sense to continue to partner with and have MTC lead and guide those new directions where they're already moving in that way, like the Clipper 2.0, the regional mapping and wayfinding project. It makes perfect sense to continue to work with MTC to lead those efforts, to continue to move them forward. At the same time, the better network connectivity and improved travel times, those are high on the priority list, but on a longer time frame work plan. You'll notice in the slide that Dana was showing, the network plan or implementing a overall network management plan for how to better integrate the service network itself didn't even show up on the work plan. Again, there are elements to it like fares and making schedules look the same and having similar wayfinding. Those are all elements. But the important thing is you can have all of those things, but if the service that's out there does not meet those integrated requirements, they're still not there. So this is an area that clearly Sonoma County can lead and can move forward on trying to take some of the services that are somewhat more duplicative and redistribute them to improve transit service overall and be beneficial, again, to those local transit riders. Next slide, please. So what should be tackled first? We've already talked about the 101 corridor. Next slide, please. We've already talked about the 101 corridor a little bit. I'm going to touch briefly on that again today. The overall report has 26, maybe it's 27 now, recommendations, including corridor alternatives and microtransit recommendations, covers a number of areas, including data, which we found to be, already talked a little bit about origin destination data as being a major shortcoming in the current data availability. Alternatives for some of the overlapping fixed route corridors, some fixed route recommendations that go beyond simply what could be done in the corridors. So what can be done to help build a system that seems like it operates as one system for the rider. At the end of the day, that's what we're really after, is to make their trip seamless, as well as for paratransit riders. So what can we do with paratransit to, again, recommendations to improve the rider experience and the overall efficiency for the paratransit operation. And then the dawning of the microtransit age in Sonoma County. And I don't want to oversell this. It's really easy to get excited about a new concept. But again, we've listed several places where it may be a possibility to consider in Sonoma County, and it probably falls a little bit further down on the priority list. But as we're in communities working on other aspects of the transit discussion, it may make a good discussion to open up and talk about what kind of microtransit opportunities there might be in communities. So we laid out a few of those. Next slide, please. Want to go back to 101. It's interesting, the discussion earlier today about the intersection improvements in Pen Grove, because just by absolute coincidence, that happened to be the very location that I chose to do a comparison of getting from that very spot that we were talking about today, that you were talking about earlier, to put in a new crosswalk, a new pedestrian crosswalk, and do some improvements in the intersection. It just so happens that is the very intersection I chose, which I thought was kind of interesting. To look at, well, what does it really mean if we have an integrated system versus we don't? From that area to get to downtown Santa Rosa, and again, I could have picked any place, but I picked downtown Santa Rosa. There are no less than currently 5 different options for how to get there. Some of them are, you get on an SCT route and you ride from that stop all the way into downtown Santa Rosa. In fact, there's 2 different SCT routes that you can get on at that particular location that both take slightly a different amount of time because they have a different pathway into downtown Santa Rosa. You can transfer from one of the county operations to a Golden Gate Transit bus a little further up the road, and be able to get into downtown Santa Rosa faster. And then the fastest of all, currently there's one opportunity a day to do this, but you can get on a Sonoma County Transit bus, get to the Cotati Smart Station, transfer to Smart, and get into downtown Santa Rosa in half the time, including the transfer time, that it takes to ride the Sonoma County Transit bus all the way up. So again, the purpose of that is to simply illustrate there are a lot of options, and so many options that this is where we start getting into some of the duplication possibilities of all the different ways you can get from Pen Grove into downtown Santa Rosa. And again, it isn't that folks don't have a need to make all of those different things and that they don't serve different purposes, but it's understanding perhaps there are different ways to put it together that are more efficient, both for the rider, that provide more rider opportunities to do that same thing, and that also could speed up the travel time. So again, it's looking at it from that perspective, as opposed to the perspective of, oh, well, we just stopped running Sonoma County Transit 44 and 48. that would be a huge mistake to do that, because there are a lot of people that really depend on those services to make local trips, like from their home to a grocery store, their home to their doctor's office, from their home to their school, maybe from their home to their employment. Those are equally important as a trip from Pen Grove to Santa Rosa, let's say. So again, understanding what those different needs are is really important, how that network can best meet those needs. Next slide, please. At the same time, in the US 101 corridor, there's the mascot study, again, that Dana already referred to today, that's getting kicked off to really start looking at what some of the longer range possibilities are, not just looking at Sonoma only, but also looking at Marin County, for how Golden Gate Transit, SMART, and the local transit agencies all contribute to the 101 corridor, and what those contributions are and how best to do that. So again, that's another planning piece that's coming together that's really focused more on the regional operation, but there's just as much importance for the local operations as well to keep an eye on that, keep a finger on that, and figure out how to provide service in this corridor in a more effective manner. Next slide, please. Other high priorities. Data, I already mentioned, there are more data issues out there than simply not knowing where all the bus riders are going to and from on a regular basis. We'll never know all of them, but we'll have a much better understanding of some of the patterns that are involved in moving around Sonoma County, the predominant patterns where we need to pay more attention to transfers, where we can pay a little less attention to transfers and pay more attention to what the level of service is, that sort of thing. Again, understanding what those look like is really important. At the same time, being able to manage our transit data, look at ridership, look at where ridership is occurring in the system, understanding what's happening with ridership on a dynamic basis and as one system instead of 5 different systems, those being Santa Rosa City Bus, Petaluma Transit, Sonoma County Transit, SMART, and Golden Gate, all of whom are providing service in Sonoma County today. Being able to look at that as a system and understand what's happening from a system perspective, rather than looking at them one at a time and trying to patch that picture together in one's mind is a huge challenge. So again, the data piece is really important to understand what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. A lot more data in the report about recommendations and how to carry those out. So we won't spend a lot of more time on that. Next slide, please. Next steps for this project. What I'm doing today, making a presentation, and I did last month, to the SCTA Transit Ad Hoc Committee. Over the next couple of months, we have several presentations being made. As for all of what you're going to get asked next is an ask about signing on to initiative to improve transit integration in Sonoma County, and I'm going to let James and Dana handle that. We will be issuing a final report after today's presentation, after there's an official, if there is an official adoption of this plan. Clearly from the staff level is to continue coordination with the MTC-led efforts as well as mascots effort to improve transit integration in the 101 corridor. With that, I'm going to stop and take a breath and see if you have any questions for me.
Yeah, I mentioned in the beginning, but I'll just reiterate that the ask for today is to accept the plan and to direct staff through the resolution attached in your board packet to do 3 different things. And that's to continue coordination with the transit operators and advancing the high priority recommendations in the plan, to facilitate the next phase of the transit website integration, and to facilitate a memorandum of understanding between the 3 local bus operators with an attached work plan for advancing those recommendations as well.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from my colleagues? There's lots of information.
Lots of information.
Director Cater Thompson.
Well, there's a few things. It reminds me of the song 9 to 5, you know, everything is really changing. Nobody's working Monday through Friday. Friday's 9 to 5, and so bring that up. But I'm really happy to see that the transit is going to start coordinating, because that seems to be what I hear the most. There's no coordination, and so I think this is a great step in the right direction. So that's my comments.
Great. Other comments or questions, Director Edwards?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it, to look at where the jobs and what types of jobs are in the areas, because I know Hillsburg, we've got hospitality jobs that don't end at 5 o'clock, like you were saying. And, you know, some other areas you may have more jobs on weekends. So I think that rather than just looking at the whole schedule, to even kind of look at the type of jobs that are available in each area.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bagby?
I think this really points to the fact that so much of our industry, not only is it seasonal agricultural work, but if we're seeing if ecotourism is a key part of our economic development plans for the county, that there's no Monday through Friday working 9 to 5. It's shift work. And I know plenty of people, actually a friend of mine who works, one of your employees who works for the county in animal control because of the lack of staffing. Her Monday is Sunday. And sometimes that shifts. So, you know, we have folks who are doing office work in our in some of our county jobs that are not working traditional Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. But one of my questions for Dana, if you could maybe talk about the time frame for adoption on some of this. But I also wanted to thank Tim for the presentation. I think it's eye-opening. It confirms with data, and it shows with data what we sort of know instinctually and anecdotally, but it also it underscores the need for additional data to make further information so that we can really make decisions going forward on the data. I think the word you were looking for in your introductory remarks was the epistles. So just answering that question. And I see this as a letter from the wilderness advising us on what you want to tell us in person, but you have to tell us via letter. So I very, very much appreciate that.
Yeah, and if I could respond to the timeframe question, I think that some of it some of it is actually happening now, especially with the efforts led by MTC, as well as other efforts that are, being discussed right now between the local operators, and some is much longer term. So the immediate needs that were really pointed to in this plan were the additional data collection, doing those origin destination studies. We did not have the data that was needed during the study to really confirm the service planning changes that were presented as alternatives. So really getting those, that data collected and then doing public outreach to confirm with the riders, that those changes are in the right direction. So I would say just to identify those service changes and confirm them, it would be roughly a year timeframe to really confirm what we would be doing. And then it would be the implementation. But there are several other things, that are discussed and mentioned as high priorities, like schedule design and transfer coordination that can be, could be tackled in smaller bits and pieces starting immediately.
Thank you very much, Director Harvey.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. A lot of really good information. It's kind of hard to get your head around all of it. So I hope we can get a copy of the presentation. you know, I know that this was a pretty daunting task, and I know we need more data, as you pointed out, to really fine tune where we need to be. But one of the important things that you said was that 90% of the travel in Sonoma County starts and ends in Sonoma County. So that actually, I feel like for us is a good thing, because we can control, if you will, more of our destiny than if, you know, if they were going out beyond the county, that'd be a little bit harder, because, you know, if you start thinking into San Francisco and places like that, that gets a little bit harder for us to control. So that was good. So I hope that we can move forward on this, and you got to take baby steps. And I think this was a good start. And thank you to your team for really getting out and talking to people, because I think, as you pointed out, Melanie, you know, we have anecdotal information from lots of people we talk to, but it's really good to capture that and memorialize it in the data we need to make changes.
Thank you. Director Corsi.
Really good to be here today. It's taken us a while to get this far, and we still have a long way to go, but I think that what we know from what's been done to date is well, I think that we're to the point where all of us can believe that by coordinating and combining the resources of all of these transit districts, all of these transit agencies, then we can improve the overall service to the whole community. That's a belief. We haven't seen it yet. There's a lot of data that's needed. There's a lot of planning that's needed as far as how to build one seamless network. That's the next step, and I'm hoping that we will all decide to take that next step today.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, I would ask if any members of the public wish to comment on this item.
I do see one member of the public wishing to speak on this item, and that is Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair and members. Steve Bertelbaugh with the Transportation Land Use Coalition. I just want to mention that in 2022, the Air Resources Board came out with its scoping plan, and they are asking for a 100% increase in transit. I don't know if that's going to apply to this county, but I think we need to, this data is going to be very, very important as we try to reach for their goal. And their goal is to increase it by the year 2030. 2030 is getting closer and closer. Thank you much.
Thank you, Steve. Chair Hawkins, I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
Thank you very much. Bringing it back to the board, any final comments, or would someone like to, Vice Chair Bagby?
I wonder if Dana or Tim would comment on this. So, you know, one of the things that I'm drawing out from the research is that iteration is going to be it's going to play a bigger role going forward. Basically, an iterative process is going to play a bigger role, and if you have an iterative process, you need a bigger data set. So we just need to have more data from all of our writers or from all of our agencies. And I think the follow-up comment on that, the other thing that I'm inferring is that to improve ridership and get, you know, we were always going to have a group of folks who are really dependent on transit. In order to make that group in order for people to use transit on a regular basis, and they have to know that they depend on it. And to me, that sounds like you just need to decrease the headways. That's what we're talking about. If you want to increase ridership, you've got to decrease wait times, and you've got to increase dependability. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about the where those two things cross each other. And what kind of timeline we might have, we might see if we have more data, we can do a better job of scheduling, we kind of increase ridership. What kind of timeline or will that take? If that, let's see, if that question
Yeah,
makes sense,
that-
Tim. That
Yeah,
makes
no,
sense.
I understand it. And I'll just say that I don't have a necessarily quantifiable crossing over point between reliability and connectivity, except to say that as frequency gets higher, that is, the buses get closer together, the departure times get closer together. Reliability, i.e. that a trip actually shows up and even if it's late, becomes less of a factor because your wait times, just by virtue of having two routes that are operating every 15 minutes cross, your wait time, even if you miss a trip, is potentially a lot less than if the two routes are running at hour frequency, or one at hour frequency and one at hour and 10-minute headway, which is, you know, a pretty gruesome combination unless you happen to be going in one specific direction. One of the challenges in Sonoma County, having said that, is that a lot of the movement is multi-directional. It's not all going in one direction. If it was, it'd be not easy. It would be simpler to plan for making really good connections, say for a group of individuals who's coming in from Sebastopol and is trying to catch a particular SMART train. That's pretty easy. When it gets to be more challenging is when you have a SMART train coming up from the south, say hitting the downtown Santa Rosa station, and you've got a group of people on there that want to go to Sebastopol, and you've got a group of people headed into a southbound train that is leaving about 15 minutes ahead of the arrival of that northbound train, also wanting to go southbound from Sebastopol someplace on the SMART system. I'm using SMART just because it's easy to use it. That's a real challenge for figuring out, okay, so which group is more important, which group is larger, which group do we need to work at first? And it is the part of the consequence of that 90% of travel that starts and ends. There is some directionality, but the truth of the matter is people are going in large different directions all at the same time, and a lot of them are waving to each other as they go past in their daily routines. One going one way into Sebastopol, somebody else going the other way for a completely different need. One of them might be going to visit a friend or going to work in a community outreach effort or going to work in one of the surrounding farms. Someone else may be going to school at Santa Rosa Junior College in Petaluma, just as a for instance, or at Sonoma State. So again, it really is a challenge to try and get these and start carving away at them one at a time. But as frequency goes up, the issue of reliability gets to be less and less. I will tell you that the most reliable transit operator that you have in Sonoma County right now is SMART by a long shot, because they have pretty much dedicated right of way and pretty much dedicated priority over general purpose traffic, which again really makes that system very, very, very reliable. At the same time, the local transit operators really have to work with what they've got available in roadway capacity as well as transit signals. There isn't a lot of transit priority on the streets and highways in Sonoma County, and it's a challenge for them because the travel times become variable. So trying to predict what those are, yes, if I leave Sebastopol, Healdsburg, Cloverdale, Windsor, wherever it is, whatever route I'm on, Sonoma, whatever route I'm on, trying to get to someplace else to transfer, the longer the distance that is, the more challenging it becomes, because it is they're dealing with a variable traffic situation that the bus itself is moving through, and then you have to provide enough time to be able to transfer people from place to place. So again, it isn't easy. It is a challenge, but I would say as frequency goes up, the dependability and reliability goes down. But the current baseline level of frequency that's currently in Sonoma County, reliability is extremely important. And it is something that it is one of the recommendations, by the way, because it's one of the things that we noted. We already had the statistics, but we actually lived it out in person as our outreach team was there in the field and noticing the on-time performance and what it looked like and how it affected people at various parts of the day. That I think that the thing that I want to point out is that even fixing on-time performance is a resource-intensive activity, because while we can potentially move a bus time from one place to another and we can extend it out, most of the time in transit, we like to have a bus mapped out for doing some number of hours of work. It's very unusual to put a bus on the street to make one trip and one trip only. So usually it's a combination of how do you sew together that bus's work to make it the most efficient so that you're not spending a lot of time sitting in one place, not moving at all. But at the same time, how do you also make it reliable? And there's a trade-off between those two things. And oftentimes the solution is, in order to make the schedule more reliable, you have to put more buses into the same schedule, even to maintain the same headway sometimes. Ideally, it's to actually improve the headway, that is how far apart the buses come, as well as improve reliability. That's the best of both worlds. But again, it's a resource intensive activity. So figuring out what those priorities are and what you're going to do with them can be a pretty substantial challenge if you're financially constrained, if you're fleet constrained, or if you're, these days for most transit agencies in the country, if you're operator constrained. To date, at least, we don't have many places in the country that a bus leaves their bus base without an operator behind the wheel. And so in a lot of places, we've had to help agencies really figure out, so what are we going to do first? We think every 6 months we can gain 5 operators. So where are we going to invest those 5 operators? So sometimes it's not even a financial investment. Sometimes it's just physically, can we get the resources required to put that service on the street and do so reliably? In other words, I don't want to tell somebody, yes, I'm going to run a 6 a.m. trip, and then and 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and then, well, we didn't have an operator show up today, so we're not going to run it on Tuesday. And then, Thursday gets there and, well, yeah, we didn't have somebody show up again, so we have to cancel this trip again. That's not reliable either. So there's that trade-off between on-time performance as well as just being able to make sure you have the resources to actually pull off what you're telling the riders that you want to be able to provide them.
Thanks, Tim. And if I could just quickly add in the piece you mentioned, like, where does the better data fit in? And I think that, what's been pointed to in these recommendations is that collecting that data will enable us to really look at that duplicated service and reduce some of it so that we can put higher frequencies where they're needed.
And maybe just one more point about the data.
And
Every
I just want to
agency.
mention that I think we're about to lose some directors to city council meetings. So
Sure.
if it's just a really sort of short follow-up.
This
point,
is
I'm
short,
worried that
yeah.
we're gonna lose some folks.
Every agency has been working really hard on the data, but every agency is also staff limited. So they have to make priority choices about, do I address trying to get this bus on time, trying to make this one connection work better, or do I address trying to improve my data? And so for many of the staff at the agencies, it's also a question of priority allocation of staff resource. So one of our recommendations that SCTA step in with an adjunct resource that can help agencies on request being able to address some of these data things and still stay up with their daytime jobs, essentially.
Great. Director Corsi, did you have your hand up? Wonderful. Okay, all right, let's hear it. You move staff recommendation?
Yes, accept the plan and adopt the resolution.
I'll second that.
So motion from Director Corsi, a second from Director Cater Thompson. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you so much for all of the work, and also my gratitude to the ad hoc that has been working on this for quite some time. So thank you so much, Dana. This is an exciting step. Onward. All right. We do, and I know we're going to start losing more people. Thank you so much, Director Cater Thompson. Next up, we have Advocacy, and I think our Executive Director Cameron is going to provide this report.
I'm going to do an abbreviated version of this and then pass it off to Chris Lee from Politico Group to give you a quick update on the bond as well as the budget. With regard to two items to touch base on first, so the Connect Bay Area Act of 2024, SB 1031, has been put on pause and there will be a reset. We will be strategizing on how to work with the region in 2025 when the authors and the project sponsor believe that new legislation will be introduced. MTC has a special meeting on Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m. I'll be attending to listen to their initial regrouping discussions on the Connect Bay Area Act. Also, I did want to point out two bills that are moving forward through the legislature on Class 3 bike lanes and sharrows. Sharrows are those paint markings within the roadway where a bike and a vehicle have to share the same traveled way. AB 2290, which is Friedman, and SB 1216, which is Blakespeare. They both made it to the second house and will be advancing through committees. They also both restrict certain fund sources for the use on Class 3 bike lanes and sharrows, and AB 2290 actually goes a step further and has a requirement that Caltrans implement at least one quick build construction project for bike lanes within each of the districts by 2027. I want to say that those pieces of legislations have a lot of nuance and color to them, but in general, they do align with our investments that we make under the GoSonoma Act that does prioritize the low stress network over those Class 3 or more, for the vulnerable users that are out there. With that, let me pass it to Chris Politico from Politico Group to give a brief update on bonds and state budget.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Lee, partner with Politico Group here. I'm actually going to flip the order a little bit and start with the budget. Since the time of the writing of the report that's in your packet, the legislature came together on a two-party deal for the budget. That was on May 29th, had committee votes on that on the 30th. And there is some good news, although it's, an interim step in the adoption of a final budget for next fiscal year. There was a restoration of the Regional Early Action Planning Grant Program of 2021, the REAP 2.0 program, which MTC had worked hard with HCD on designing a grant program, including a lot of priorities I know in Sonoma County related to, high priority sites that would be available for housing and support housing element and transportation goals. The governor had proposed a $300 million reduction. The legislature restored $250 million of that. And so while it's not final, it's definitely where we want to be in this process right now. The other restoration that I'll highlight for you is the active transportation program. The legislature opted to backfill $600 million that were proposed to be eliminated from the general fund with the state highway account. I think this one might be a little bit tougher of a lift for the legislature. The administration has been pretty strident in saying that there's not a lot of extra funding in the state highway account for a few fiscal years. And so I think they might take a hard line against using that funding, which supports state highway operations and maintenance, including increasingly Caltrans-led active transportation improvements on those facilities. But in any case, we know there's a lot of projects of interest in that program in the region. In the transit space, some additional delays, pushing funding out additional years in the SB 125 Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, the formula-based program, as well as the Zero Emissions Transit Capital Program, which can be flexed into operations. But the big deal total top line number, about $5 billion from last budget, is intact. We're just seeing more deferrals. So where are we at in the process? The Constitution has a June 15th deadline for the legislature to pass a balanced budget. The budget bill, as amended by that two-party deal, went into print over the weekend, late Saturday night and later on Sunday morning. And so that will be eligible on basically Wednesday morning. The legislature could take that up. They've also put into print two trailer bills related to Proposition 98, education funding, and taxation. And so we have not heard that there's a three-party deal between the governor and the two houses yet. It's getting close to, I think, what we're expecting to see now is that the legislature would likely pass their plan, which would meet the constitutional requirement, and then we'll see subsequent negotiations to come up with a final deal. Obviously, the legislature has the governor has blue pencil authority. So if he simply wanted to reduce line item appropriations, he could do that. But the legislature is also pushing on the administration for some additional reductions in places. For instance, they really want the administration to close a prison. They're counting on about $1 billion in savings from that activity. So I think just seeing the governor line item mark up the budget would be unlikely. I think we'll likely see a deal at some point between all of the parties, but that may not happen before that June 15th deadline, especially now that we have this 3-day in print rule for bills. And so those are the top line items I wanted to highlight in budget. The budget debate is also, I think, pretty well tied up in the discussion about bonds. And so what we've been hearing is school bond remains the highest priority item, and then followed by the climate and resources bond. And I'm hearing numbers from the range of, $6 to $10 billion for climate. That's quite a bit lower than both of the current legislative vehicles, which are over $15 billion. So we're anticipating some reductions there. Different funding scenarios have leaked out from negotiations. But for the purposes of SCTA and RCPA's advocacy, we've had good conversations with members of the delegation and provided them language that we think will help position SCTA, RCPA for success in climate bond programs consistent with your adopted climate mobilization strategy. So, don't want to count any, chickens before they're hatched, but I think there's a good chance that we can see some language perhaps across the bond and perhaps within some key targeted programs that will ensure that the RCPA is well suited to competing for those future funding possibilities. The deadline for a bond measure to get on the ballot for November is June 27th. That's a statutory deadline, so it can be changed within the realm of physical possibility, like printing ballots and printing the voter information guide. But we haven't seen amendments to either of the Senate or Assembly bond vehicles come out yet. But I think given that the housing bond seems to have kind of fallen off the agenda, it makes me optimistic that we might see restorations in programs like REAP that are supporting affordable housing. And it makes me, think that some of the reductions that are happening in the climate space might be offset by a climate bond and those investments that are there. So I think these two items are really proceeding in a very fluid, very high-level negotiations that are taking place in Sacramento, and would expect to see some movement on the bond measures shortly after the budget is closer to resolved. And so I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. I know we're on a bit of a time crunch, but hopefully that was a helpful update for you all.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from my colleague? Seeing none, do we have any comments from members of the public?
I don't see any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, Chair.
Great. And this is listed as an action item. Are we essentially sort of accepting the report and just kind of affirming the current positions? Okay, great. In the staff report? Wonderful. So it would be great. And I think we still have a quorum great. Perfect.
Second.
All right. I think we're giving it to Director Harvey. I'm seeing the pointing finger. All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Seeing none, that does carry unanimously of members present. We are now on to reports and announcements. Do we want to do an abbreviated version of this, of like a speed dating round, or how do we want to handle this? James, what do you think?
So the activities reports are within your packet, right? As far as the takeaways that, let me grab the right agenda here.
Yeah, we could also just do questions. If anyone has questions on the material in the packet, should we do that way? Does that
Absolutely.
make sense? Okay, great. So let's first ask if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on items 6.1 through 6.4, which are all of the reports and announcements.
Members of the public wish to speak.
Seeing none, I would ask if any of my colleagues have any questions on the material provided in the packets under the reports. Seeing none, that would bring us, and actually, James, is there anything you want to just highlight, like sort of top level, super important, want to mention publicly?
That what's in the packet is fine. What I did want to just mention publicly, though, as far as the activities reports are concerned, we do have a new staff member that's joined our projects and programming group. So Margot.
Come on up and introduce yourself. We would love to say hi.
Let's say hello.
Hello.
Hi, do you want to give the background or shall I?
Please.
Okay, well, I am thrilled to be here. My name is Margot Ocañas. I journey north from the city of Los Angeles. I was with Department of Transportation for just over 10 years with a focus on safe routes to school and active transportation. Was very aggressive in garnering funds, close to 200 million for the city of Los Angeles. And I am very excited to be here joining this team, really weaving climate protection and infrastructure into my projects, and hopefully doing just as good a job in garnering some funds for this audience. So I welcome any questions. I'm an empty nester, so I've left 2 kids in LA. So if I look like I have bags under my eyes, because I'm like, hope they're doing okay. But welcome any questions.
Welcome. We're so excited to have you here. It's really wonderful to meet you in person and look forward to working with you. Is there anything else anyone want to add? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Do we have any board member announcements? Any upcoming fun things? All right. We're a boring group today. With that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Places to be.